Michael had just returned home from a long day at work and was settling into his favorite chair, eagerly awaiting the return of his wife, Emily, from the grocery store. It was going to be a cozy evening. The two of them would cook dinner together and then curl up to watch the latest episode of their favorite show. Just as he was starting to relax, a loud, insistent knock broke the quiet. Must be Emily, Michael thought with a chuckle, assuming she'd forgotten her keys again. But as he opened the door, expecting to see his wife, Michael was surprised by the sight in front of him. Standing there, flushed and beaming, was his mother, Linda Petrovna, with several large suitcases by her side. Michael's confusion grew as he remembered that only a few hours ago, he'd called his mother, but she had been too busy to talk. Now, without warning, she was on his doorstep, clearly planning to stay for a while. Before he could ask what was going on, Linda, a robust woman with an unstoppable energy, swept him into a tight hug. "Son, I'm here with good news," she announced, barely able to contain her excitement. "I'm about to come into a lot of money. Pack your bags, Michael, we're all going on a vacation soon." Startled, Michael managed to free himself from her enthusiastic embrace and invited her inside. He couldn't help but ask, "Wait, what do you mean? How are you suddenly going to get all this money?" Linda plopped herself down on the couch with a self-satisfied grin. "I sold my apartment and invested the money in stocks. Just 1 week from now, I'll be rich." Michael's jaw dropped. "What do you mean you sold your apartment? You didn't really, did you?" He could hardly believe what he was hearing. His mother, who was usually a cautious person, had gone and sold her home on a whim. Just then, the door opened, and Emily entered, carrying bags of groceries. Michael immediately relayed the surprising news. Emily, caught off guard, dropped the bags, her eyes wide with disbelief. Linda beamed at them both, clearly proud of her brilliant decision. "What's wrong with both of you?" she asked, laughing. "I did this for us. Without me, you'd never have the chance to live so well." Michael looked at his mother in horror, realizing she hadn't fully grasped the potential disaster she'd set in motion. Although he knew she was often drawn to get-rich-quick schemes, he hadn't expected her to take it this far. In the past, she'd tried network marketing, questionable business ventures, and even pyramid schemes, but this was on another level entirely. As Linda rambled on about the luxurious vacation they'd take with her upcoming fortune, Emily leaned toward Michael, whispering, "She's lost her mind. You need to talk her into filing a police report or something. This can't be real." But Linda dismissed any concern as ignorance. She laughed off Emily's worries, promising that soon, they'd all thank her for her vision and courage. "I'll stay here with you two for a week or two," she announced with satisfaction, "and once my investment pays off, I'll buy myself a new place, one with a big renovation, of course, and plenty of space for everyone." Emily was furious. Not only had Linda moved into their home without asking, but she'd also dragged Michael into yet another one of her impulsive schemes. A tense week lay ahead, and Emily could only hope it wouldn't end in disaster. After Linda moved in, the tension in Michael and Emily's apartment became palpable. Linda, brimming with excitement about her upcoming fortune, spent her days regaling them with stories of the lavish lifestyle she envisioned. According to her, their future was just a week away from transforming into one of luxury, fine dining, high-end shopping sprees, vacations, and a new home for herself, with plenty of space for everyone. But Michael and Emily were far from convinced. As Linda rattled on about her extravagant plans, they exchanged anxious glances. Both knew that Linda had a history of impulsive decisions, each promising wealth and success, but always ending in disappointment. The thought of her actually selling her apartment, the place she'd lived in for decades, made Michael feel both angry and helpless. Over dinner that evening, Michael tried to bring up his concerns gently. "Mom, are you sure this investment is safe? Maybe we should double-check with a financial advisor or look at the paperwork just to be cautious." Linda scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "You're always so careful, Michael. That's why you've never taken risks. People who play it safe their whole lives never achieve anything big. This is our chance, and I have absolute confidence in my decision." Trust me, you'll see. Emily, barely able to hide her frustration, chimed in with a softer approach. Linda, maybe we could just look over everything with fresh eyes? You know, just to be sure everything's in order. Linda bristled at the suggestion, her eyes narrowing. So now you're questioning me too, she asked, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. I know what I'm doing, Emily. And quite frankly, I expected a little more support from my own family. After dinner, Linda retired to the guest room with an air of superiority, seemingly oblivious to the strain she was putting on the couple. Michael and Emily, however, sat in tense silence, each lost in thought. Michael could see the worry in Emily's eyes and knew she was reaching her limit. Their once peaceful home now felt like it was under siege. As the days passed, Linda grew more impatient, checking her phone constantly, as though expecting an update at any moment confirming her newfound wealth. When nothing came, her mood shifted. Her bright, hopeful demeanor turned sour, and she became increasingly irritable, taking out her frustration on Michael and Emily. Every evening, Linda would pace around the living room, muttering to herself, casting glances at her phone, then directing sharp comments at Emily over small things, a slightly overcooked dish, dust she claimed to have seen on a shelf, or the way Emily arranged the kitchen. It seemed like she was finding ways to exert control in the only space she had left. Michael and Emily bit their tongues, trying to be patient, hoping the ordeal would end soon. Then, one afternoon, Linda's irritation turned into panic. She burst into the living room, holding her phone with a look of desperation. Something's wrong, she exclaimed, her voice laced with fear. I haven't heard anything back about the stocks. I sent emails, but no one's replied, and the website, it's not loading. Michael felt a chill run through him. He exchanged a glance with Emily, who looked equally concerned. Let me take a look, he said, taking the phone from his mother's trembling hands. He opened the website link she'd been using, but the page displayed an error message, website unavailable. Michael refreshed it, hoping it was a glitch, but the error remained. He quickly searched the company name online, scrolling through several articles that all pointed to the same grim reality. The so-called investment firm was a scam, one that had deceived dozens of people, vanishing with their life savings. As he read, Michael's heart sank. He looked up at Linda, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. She seemed to sense the truth before he even spoke. Mom. I think you've been scammed, he said softly, his voice laced with sympathy and frustration. Linda's face paled, her confident demeanor crumbling as the realization hit her. She stumbled back, sinking into a chair, her hands covering her mouth in horror. No, that can't be. I was so sure, she whispered, her voice breaking. For the first time since she'd arrived, Linda seemed genuinely vulnerable, a woman who had just lost everything she owned because of one reckless decision. Michael and Emily exchanged glances, knowing that, for better or worse, they would have to support her through this ordeal. But both of them also understood that this was only the beginning of the emotional storm that was about to sweep through their lives. In the days following Linda's shocking revelation, the atmosphere in Michael and Emily's apartment grew tense and heavy. Linda, who had once been so sure of her decision, now spent her days in a state of denial mixed with despair. She was quiet at first, processing her sudden loss, but her grief soon turned into anger and frustration that filled every corner of their home. One morning, Emily walked into the kitchen to find Linda sitting at the table, staring blankly at her now cold coffee. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled, and her face lined with exhaustion. Michael sat across from her, trying to offer comfort, but his own frustration was palpable. Linda looked up as Emily entered, her voice a hollow murmur. They took everything I worked so hard for. How could they do this to me? She seemed genuinely lost, as if struggling to make sense of how easily she'd been deceived. Emily took a seat beside Michael, choosing her words carefully. Linda, we can look into options. Maybe the police can help. Sometimes these scammers are caught, and some funds can be recovered. But Linda scoffed, her tone laced with bitterness. And what? Spend months in court with no guarantee of getting anything back? Those thieves are probably in another country by now. Her anger flashed, but behind it was a deep sadness that even she couldn't mask. In an attempt to soothe her, Michael placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, we'll get through this. We're here for you, but we need to take some steps. Filing a report is the first one." She brushed his hand off, rising from the table abruptly. "You have no idea what it's like to lose everything," she snapped. "This was my security, my future. How could I have been so foolish?" Over the next week, Linda's anger morphed into a bitter resentment that seeped into every interaction. She grew irritable, criticizing everything around her as if her loss had somehow heightened her awareness of every flaw. She'd point out small imperfections in Emily's cooking, complain about Michael's lack of ambition, and make subtle, cutting comments about the mediocrity of their apartment. The couple's patience wore thin, but they tried to understand her pain. Emily often reminded herself that Linda was grieving, processing a deep loss, and feeling humiliated over her mistake. But even Emily's resilience had its limits. One evening, as they were clearing up after dinner, Linda sighed dramatically, setting down her fork with a loud clatter. "It's so small in here," she said, casting a disdainful look around the apartment. "I don't understand how you two can live in such cramped quarters." Michael's jaw clenched, and Emily took a slow breath before replying. "Linda, this is our home. It may not be much, but it's comfortable and it's ours." Linda shrugged, unbothered by the hurt that flashed across Emily's face. "Maybe if Michael had made better choices, you'd have a bigger place by now. You could have had that nice house, if only he'd had some ambition." Her words were dripping with disappointment and blame, directed at Michael as if he were responsible for her own missteps. Michael finally snapped. "Mom, we're doing our best. This apartment is our home, and we're happy here. I know you're hurting, but that doesn't give you the right to belittle us." His voice was firm but calm, drawing a surprised look from both Linda and Emily. But instead of apologizing, Linda's face turned cold. "So, you're turning on me now too? After everything I've done for you, I end up here in this tiny apartment, treated like a burden?" She rose from her chair, her eyes filling with a mixture of anger and resentment. Emily stood up, her own patience exhausted. "Linda, we've tried to help you. But this isn't fair to us. We've welcomed you into our home, supported you, and all we ask is a little respect." Linda's response was to storm off, retreating to the guest room and slamming the door behind her. Michael and Emily exchanged a look, both feeling the strain of a situation that seemed to be spiraling further out of control. That night, as they lay in bed, Emily finally voiced her fears. "Michael, how long can we keep doing this? She's making our lives miserable, and I don't know how much more I can take." Michael turned to her, his own face lined with worry. "I know. But she's my mother. I can't just throw her out when she has nowhere else to go. I feel responsible." Emily sighed, struggling to balance her compassion with her own need for peace. "I understand, but we can't keep living like this. Maybe it's time to find a solution, even if it's a difficult one." They both lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the burden of Linda's presence was not just a temporary setback, it was becoming an unsustainable pressure on their marriage. As the days turned into weeks, the situation with Linda became unbearable. Her anger had only deepened, lashing out at Michael and Emily for what she saw as their lack of sympathy. Every day brought new complaints and criticisms about their lifestyle, the size of the apartment, even the way they managed their finances. What had once been a peaceful home was now a tense environment where Emily and Michael found themselves tiptoeing around Linda, dreading her next outburst. One evening, after another dinner filled with Linda's passive-aggressive remarks, Emily decided she could no longer stay silent. After Linda had gone to bed, she turned to Michael, her face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "Michael," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "we need to talk. This situation with your mother, it's becoming too much." Michael nodded, his own face lined with stress. "I know, Emily. Believe me, I do. But she's going through a lot. She's lost everything, and she has nowhere else to go. Emily took a deep breath, searching for the right words. I understand that she's struggling. I really do. But this is affecting us, our marriage, our peace, everything. I feel like I'm a stranger in my own home, constantly criticized and dismissed. Michael looked away, struggling with his loyalties to his mother and his love for his wife. I don't know what else to do. She's my mother. I can't just abandon her. Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm. I'm not asking you to abandon her, Michael. But there has to be a boundary, a line that we set to protect our life together. If we don't do something soon, I don't know how much more I can take. The words hung heavy in the air, and Michael felt a pang of dread at the ultimatum he sensed in Emily's tone. He had hoped they could weather this storm, that his mother's bitterness would eventually ease. But Emily's patience had clearly run out, and he couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on her. Later that night, as Michael lay awake, he replayed Emily's words in his mind. He knew she was right, this wasn't sustainable. But he also knew that speaking to his mother about moving out, about finding a place of her own, would be one of the hardest conversations he'd ever have. He feared her reaction, feared that she would see it as a betrayal rather than an act of necessity. The next morning, Michael mustered the courage to bring it up with Linda. He found her in the kitchen, nursing her coffee, her face set in a permanent expression of dissatisfaction. He took a seat across from her, steeling himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. Mom, he began carefully, I think we need to talk about finding a more permanent solution for you. This arrangement, it's starting to put a strain on everyone. Linda looked up, her eyes narrowing. A strain? Michael, I'm your mother. I raised you, I sacrificed for you, and now you want to throw me out because I made one mistake? Michael shook his head, trying to keep his voice steady. Mom, no one is trying to throw you out. But Emily and we need our space, and I think you do too. Living here, it isn't working for any of us. Her expression hardened, and Michael could see the hurt and anger welling up in her eyes. So, that's it? I lose everything, and now my own son wants to push me out too? After all I've done for you? For this family? Michael took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. Mom, it's not like that. We're willing to help you find a new place, maybe a small apartment nearby. We can support you financially until you get back on your feet. But Linda wasn't listening. She rose from the table, her voice shaking with indignation. I see how it is. Emily's turned you against me. She's made you choose her over your own mother. I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son would betray me like this. Michael felt a pang of guilt but forced himself to stand his ground. Mom, please try to understand. I love you, but I also love Emily, and I have to protect my marriage. This isn't about choosing one over the other, it's about finding a way for all of us to move forward without resentment. Linda's response was to storm out of the kitchen, her anger palpable. She retreated to the guest room, slamming the door behind her, leaving Michael standing alone, a mixture of guilt and relief swirling within him. He knew this conversation was only the beginning, that convincing his mother to leave would be a long and difficult process. But he also knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. That night, when he told Emily about the conversation, she took his hand, her relief evident. Thank you, Michael. I know that wasn't easy, but I appreciate you taking a stand. Michael managed a faint smile, though he felt far from at ease. He was caught between the duty he felt toward his mother and the commitment he had to his wife, and the path forward felt anything but simple. For the first time, though, he felt a glimmer of hope that they might just make it through this ordeal, together. The days following Michael's conversation with Linda were tense and silent. Linda withdrew into herself, barely speaking a word to either Michael or Emily. She would emerge from her room for meals, her eyes cold and distant, her responses curt and dismissive. Every attempt Michael made to ease the tension was met with resistance, and each evening ended with an uneasy silence hanging over the apartment. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Linda barely acknowledged their presence, Emily decided to break the silence. She could feel the resentment growing, and she knew that ignoring the issue would only make things worse. So, as Linda rose to leave the table, Emily spoke up, her voice calm but determined. "Linda, can we talk for a moment?" Emily asked, trying to keep her tone respectful. Linda turned slowly, her expression icy. "What is there to talk about, Emily? It's clear that my presence here is no longer welcome." Emily took a deep breath, meeting Linda's gaze. "It's not about you being unwelcome. Michael and I both understand that you've been through a lot. But the way things are right now, it's affecting everyone. We want to help you, but we also need to make sure our home is a place of peace for all of us." Linda scoffed, crossing her arms. "A place of peace? I see what this is really about. You just want me out of the way so you can have Michael all to yourself. I know what you're trying to do." Michael, sensing that things were escalating, tried to step in. "Mom, that's not fair. Emily's only trying to make this work for all of us. We're not against you, we just need a balance." But Linda's eyes flashed with anger, her tone sharpening. "Balance? You two are practically throwing me out. After everything I did to raise you, Michael, this is how you repay me? By making me feel like a burden in my own son's home?" Emily, trying to keep her patience, replied softly, "Linda, no one is trying to make you feel like a burden. We just need boundaries so that we can all live peacefully. You have a right to your own space too, where you can feel comfortable, not like a guest." Linda shook her head, her voice growing louder. "Boundaries? Comfort? Since when did you two start using such fancy words to justify pushing family away? I thought family was supposed to stay together, support each other." The tension in the room was thick. Michael, feeling caught between his wife and his mother, struggled to find a way to calm things down. He knew his mother's pride was wounded, that she saw any suggestion of leaving as a rejection. But he also knew that this living arrangement was damaging his marriage and his relationship with both women. After a long pause, Michael took a deep breath and spoke firmly. "Mom, I love you, and I will always be here to support you. But I also need to respect my marriage and my home. Please try to understand that finding a new place isn't about abandoning you. It's about making things work for everyone." Linda's face hardened, her expression one of betrayal. She shook her head slowly, disappointment clouding her eyes. "So, it's true. You're choosing her over me. Fine. If that's how you feel, I'll pack my things." Before either of them could respond, she turned and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. Michael and Emily stood in silence, both feeling the weight of what had just happened. They knew that Linda wasn't likely to forgive this easily, and that any decision to leave would come with resentment and bitterness. Later that night, Michael and Emily sat together in the living room, both too drained to speak. Emily took his hand, offering him a gentle squeeze. "I know this is hard, Michael," she whispered, "but you did the right thing. I'm proud of you for standing up for us." Michael managed a faint smile, though the guilt in his chest lingered. "I just hope she can forgive me, someday. I never wanted it to come to this." In the days that followed, Linda packed her belongings in silence, refusing to meet Michael or Emily's gaze. She was leaving, but not without making it clear that she felt abandoned and wronged. The resentment in her eyes was a painful reminder to Michael of the price he had paid to protect his marriage. The day of Linda's departure arrived with a heavy tension that settled over the apartment like a dark cloud. Michael and Emily awoke to the sound of her moving around the guest room, her footsteps quick and deliberate. Linda had packed her bags the night before, her actions filled with an unspoken resentment that hung heavily in the air. Neither Michael nor Emily dared to interrupt her, each of them quietly preparing themselves for the inevitable goodbye. As Michael entered the hallway, he found Linda already by the door, her bag stacked beside her. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Michael hoped for a sign of forgiveness, a look that said she understood, even if she didn't agree. But her eyes were cold, and her face held the hardened mask of someone who felt betrayed. "Mom," Michael began softly, stepping toward her. I want you to know that this wasn't easy for us. We didn't want it to come to this, but we need space to build our lives, just like you do. Linda crossed her arms, her gaze steely. Is that so, Michael? And here I thought family was supposed to stand by each other, no matter what. But I guess you two have your own ideas of loyalty. Emily, standing a few feet away, stayed silent, not wanting to add to the tension. She felt a pang of guilt, but also a deep sense of relief. The months with Linda had tested her patience, her marriage, and her peace of mind. Emily couldn't deny that she was ready to reclaim her home and her life with Michael, even if it came at the cost of Linda's approval. Michael took a deep breath, steadying his voice. Mom, please understand. We're here for you, but we need our own space too. We're even willing to help with rent or finding a place close by. This doesn't mean we're abandoning you. Linda's face twisted with bitterness. I don't need your charity, Michael. And I certainly don't need pity from her, she said, casting a sharp glance at Emily. I raised you by myself, with no help, and this is the thanks I get? A son who pushes his own mother out the door? Michael's expression softened, guilt clouding his eyes. It's not like that, Mom. I'll check on you often, and I'll make sure you're comfortable in your new place. But this is about us being able to have a balanced life, without constant tension. I need you to understand that. Linda's jaw tightened, and she picked up her bags with a finality that crushed Michael's last hope for reconciliation. I see how it is, she muttered, barely meeting his eyes. Well, I don't want to be where I'm not welcome. She walked past him, her back stiff with indignation. Emily stepped aside as Linda brushed by, barely sparing her a glance. With a cold silence, Linda made her way down the apartment hallway, each step echoing the hurt and anger that had grown between them. As the door clicked shut, Michael felt a hollow ache settle in his chest. He'd known this would be painful, but nothing could have prepared him for the finality of it. Emily moved beside him, wrapping her arms around him in silent comfort. The apartment felt different already, quieter, less tense, but also filled with an undeniable sense of loss. They stood there for a long moment, each feeling the weight of what had just happened. For Michael, the relief of reclaiming his home was tempered by a deep sadness, a gnawing guilt that his relationship with his mother might never be the same. Later that evening, Emily did her best to lift Michael's spirits, preparing his favorite meal and talking with him about their plans for the future. She could see the sadness in his eyes, but she also sensed a quiet strength, a resolve that had grown from finally taking a stand. As they sat down to dinner, Emily reached across the table, taking his hand. You did the right thing, Michael. This wasn't easy, but you chose our life together. That means everything to me. Michael looked at her, the love and gratitude clear in his expression. Thank you, Emily. I just hope, someday, my mom will understand. In the quiet that followed, Michael felt a new sense of peace beginning to settle within him. Though there was still healing to be done, he knew that he had taken a step toward building the life he truly wanted, with Emily by his side, and boundaries firmly in place. For the first time in months, their home felt like their own. In the weeks that followed Linda's departure, Michael and Emily began to feel the weight of tension lifting from their lives. The apartment, once filled with resentment and conflict, had returned to a place of warmth and peace. Michael still felt a lingering sadness over how things had ended with his mother, but he knew that this change was necessary for his marriage and his own mental well-being. Emily, sensing Michael's mixed emotions, made an effort to create a comforting environment, rebuilding the routines they had once enjoyed together. They spent quiet evenings cooking meals, watching movies, and reconnecting over simple, uninterrupted conversations. Slowly, they found their way back to the closeness they'd had before Linda's arrival. One Saturday morning, as they were tidying up the apartment, Emily paused, watching Michael thoughtfully. How are you feeling about everything? She asked, her voice gentle. It couldn't have been easy saying goodbye to your mom like that. Michael sighed, leaning against the counter. It wasn't. Part of me feels guilty, like I could have done more to help her or convince her that we weren't abandoning her. But I also know that if we didn't set boundaries, it would have destroyed us. Emily stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him in a reassuring embrace. I understand. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you don't love her. It means you're protecting the life we're building together. That's important, and it takes courage. Her words eased the guilt in Michael's heart. He knew that what he'd done wasn't an act of rejection, but rather a choice to prioritize his own family, his marriage, and his future with Emily. For the first time, he began to truly accept that loving someone didn't mean sacrificing his own happiness and peace. The following week, Michael reached out to a counselor for advice on maintaining healthy boundaries and family relationships. He knew that his relationship with his mother might take time to heal, but he was determined to approach it in a way that wouldn't compromise his marriage or his own well-being. In the meantime, Emily and Michael began discussing plans they'd put on hold during the turmoil with Linda. They talked about goals they had for their future, including the possibility of buying a home of their own. Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that he had the power to shape his life according to his values, not just the expectations of others. One evening, Emily surprised him with a small celebration. She set up a candlelit dinner at home, complete with his favorite dishes and a few heartfelt decorations. As they sat down to eat, Emily raised her glass in a toast. To new beginnings, she said with a warm smile. To choosing our happiness and building a life together, one that's ours and ours alone. Michael clinked his glass with hers, a smile spreading across his face. To us. And to the strength it took to get here. They enjoyed a quiet evening, savoring the peace they'd fought to create. For the first time in months, they felt fully present with each other, their laughter filling the apartment that had once been weighed down by conflict and uncertainty. They had come through a difficult chapter, and now they could finally look forward to a future built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. As time went on, Michael and Emily settled into a life of newfound peace and stability. The days were calm, filled with routines that felt comforting rather than tense. Although the emotional aftermath of Linda's departure lingered, Michael found himself healing more each day, reassured by Emily's constant support and love. Their bond had deepened through the challenges they'd faced, and both were determined to make the most of this new chapter. One evening, Michael received an unexpected call from his mother. Seeing her name flash on the screen brought a pang of anxiety, but he took a deep breath and answered. Linda's tone was cautious, softer than he'd heard in months. Michael, it's been a while, she began, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. I wanted to check in. I know things were tense when I left, but I've been thinking a lot. Michael's heart softened, and he listened intently. It was rare for his mother to admit any self-reflection, and he sensed a shift in her demeanor. She went on, sharing that she had settled into a modest apartment with the help of some friends. Though she missed the old comforts, she had come to realize that her decisions had placed an unfair burden on Michael and Emily. I suppose I've been too proud to admit that, she said, her voice tinged with regret. I know I wasn't easy to live with, and I understand why you did what you did. I was angry, but I can see now that maybe it was for the best. Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was the conversation he had long hoped for, a chance to mend the bond that had felt so strained. He spoke gently, acknowledging the pain they had all endured but expressing his hope that they could move forward. Mom, I've always wanted you to be part of our lives, Michael said, his voice steady yet warm. But I need you to understand that Emily and I need our own space and independence, just as you deserve yours. We're here for you, and I'm glad to hear that things are settling down. Linda was quiet for a moment, then sighed softly. I'll try to respect that, Michael. It's not easy, but I'm learning. I just want you to be happy. As they ended the call, Michael felt a newfound sense of closure. For the first time, it felt like they could truly rebuild their relationship on healthier terms. He shared the news with Emily, who smiled with relief, her hand resting on his shoulder. That's a big step, Michael, Emily said softly. I'm proud of you for standing by us and giving her a chance to come around. In the following weeks, Michael and Emily continued to move forward with their plans. They began looking at homes together, excitedly discussing each possibility as they envisioned their future. Michael also kept a respectful line of communication with his mother, now confident in his boundaries and able to enjoy their relationship without feeling compromised. One weekend, Michael and Emily hosted a small gathering for their close friends, a celebration of the fresh start they'd worked so hard to achieve. As they laughed and shared stories, Michael looked around at the faces of those who had supported them, feeling grateful for the journey that had brought him here. Toward the end of the evening, Michael pulled Emily aside, holding her hands as he looked into her eyes. "Thank you for standing by me through everything," he murmured. "We've come so far, and I couldn't have done it without you." Emily smiled, her eyes warm with affection. "We did it together, Michael. And whatever comes next, I know we're ready." As they embraced, Michael felt a profound sense of peace, a peace that came from knowing he had protected the life he and Emily were building, a life rooted in mutual respect, love, and a shared vision for the future. They were moving forward, not weighed down by past conflicts, but lifted by the strength they had found in each other. For the first time, Michael truly felt at home.